of empathy, not only for themselves, but empathy towards others who will be experiencing that certain failure, and that would be also become a certain boost to them to improve the way they learn. So those are certain roles that we as teachers should look into when we talk about assessment as learning. And as a teacher myself, how do I look into assessment as learning? It is an opportunity for me to provide certain feedback, descriptive feedback for students to improve their habits. It's not only focused on teacher giving feedback alone, but the students getting to dive to digest this feedback that I give and improve the way they work. And even them, you also provide an avenue for them to give feedback to others, peer feedbacking, peer assessment, so that they can also be empowered, that teachers are also providing them an opportunity to be part of the learning process. It's also important that we get to report these things, not only for you, it's not only for our own consumption as teachers, it has to be for the consumption also of other people who are very much involved in their learnings. This would mean the parents. A constant communication to their parents about how they learn would definitely be a must, definitely be important, so that the parents can also collaborate with us as we help them improve learning. Here are some ways on how I do assessment as learning. In assessment as learning, first, I allow my students to create an environment so that they could be able to express their ideas. We allow them to be able to say their ideas freely without that fear that they would feel ostracized for the ideas that they say, whether it's written, whether it's spoken, or taken by different forms of media, in this case, a video. So in my classes, before I normally as an exit pass, I would want them to give me insights of what they do or what they learn in my class before they leave before they leave our video conferencing tool in their learning management system. In this case, in Schoology, I normally post a question where they type all these things that they learn and the things that they got clear in my class. And that's a way for me to be able to justify that they indeed learned something from my class. So exit passes definitely is a good reflection. It's a good descriptive way of showing their assessment as learning. Another way is using Padlet. Padlet would definitely be a good tool for you to be able to allow your students to express their thoughts and at the same time provide an avenue for them to utilize certain form of media. Like in this case, as you see in the picture, students can also post a photo that would capture what exactly are they explaining from their explanation, and it can also be a way for them to explain or express their creativity. In our class, we also allow them to measure how much they learn or where they are in terms of our standards, in terms of our learning goals. We allow them to rate themselves, self-assessment in terms of rating competencies. So at the end of the whole unit, at the end of the whole cycle, we allow them to rate themselves in terms of the learning goals. Did they get to learn the learning goals set for them for that specific cycle? They rate themselves as excellent, average, and beginning. And that for us is a way for us to do assessment as learning. Lastly, it's also a way for them to be able to explain. We students, we have digital natives. We hold digital natives. And allowing them to be able to utilize media, specifically video making, in expressing their opinions, expressing their ideas would definitely be of help. So I utilize Flipgrid in my classes in order for me to hear their perspectives, provide them a voice, active voice, in saying their piece on a certain matter that we are discussing in class. So these are certain ways on how you're going to be able to apply assessment as learning in your own classes. For now, let's deepen our idea of assessment as learning, and let's try our very best to do a deeper conversation about assessment as learning. So I will be introducing to you a good friend of mine. He used to be my colleague when I was working in Assumption College, and he is now working as a junior high school CLE teacher in Xavier School in San Juan. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Mr. Angelo Maliari. Oops. Hey, Angelo, are you there?
Yes.
All
Good
right.
afternoon.
Right. Would you like to tell something about yourself to our audience?
Okay. Again, as Miss Emmy have mentioned, I'm Angelo Maliari from Saver School. I'm teaching Christian life education, and uh, regarding the topic, it's really close to my heart because reflection is something that I feel students need, not only because we are in a pandemic, but also because it helps them look into their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings, and try to make meaning of it or from it, and then try to connect it to their lives. And hopefully that will bring about deeper learning and action.
Right. And exactly why Angelo is invited for our conversation for today. So I hope we could be able to give more ways, more tips for our audience to do assessment as learning in their remote setup. Okay, let's start the ball rolling. Okay, allow me to go to our first slide. Okay, Angelo, assessment as learning occurs or focuses on students, and it emphasizes assessment as a process of metacognition. In your experience, how do you lead your students to do metacognition?
Of course, first, Miss Emmy, one of the things that we have to consider is to give them opportunities to
Right.
reflect, because it is important. Sometimes when we are teaching, we think of giving the content, but at the same time, we have to give pauses in order for them to reflect on what they have been learning. And so in our classes, we really look into either in within between the discussions where we give time for them to reflect. And when I mean reflection, since it's Christian life education, the CLE, sometimes of course we look into their faith, we look into their spirituality, but at the same time we also touch the experiences and the feelings and their thoughts,
Right.
because we believe that reflection, it doesn't only happen in CL but actually in all subjects, because we can reflect using conceptual, or it can be again as we mentioned metacognitive, the process of their reflection of their thoughts, and then of course personal. So some of the things that we utilize is, for example, we have mind maps where we give a concept and then we ask them to think about and connect their learning, their previous learning, and their prior and some of the things that they have learned in other subjects, and try to connect that to their present learning, and how will it affect their lives, or how it is connected to their lives, their thoughts, their feelings on those particular topics. At the same time, we also have empathy map. So I think that is one of the things that is very nice, because we put them into a perspective where they try to think and feel the way those people, those particular sectors, those particular personalities may have experienced, may have thought, may have heard, and so forth and so on.
Right. So in this slide, you're utilizing different strategies for you to be able to allow your students to do metacognitive thinking. Like example, you do mind maps and empathy map. I like that. That's a really good strategy. Right. In this slide, I'd like to ask you, what activities do you do to engage your students to showcase their knowledge about themselves, and what are their influences as they perform certain topic? What tools do you use to measure all these things?
Uh, for the activities, we highly really recommend as CLE teacher to do journal logs, because we believe that when they are given the opportunity to stop, think about their thoughts, think about their feelings, think about their concerns, so forth and so on, and we ask them to write it down, so that they will be able to reflect on it, go back to it, and that helps in the way they think about themselves, the way they try to influence their actions as well. And then also, as you mentioned in your recap and the introduction of the topics, discussion board is I think one of the things that we can actually utilize, because it gives them the opportunity to share their thoughts, to share, and then ask other students to as well comment, to give suggestions. It's either they agree or disagree. So these
Right.
are
I
just
like that.
some of the tools. Yeah.
Right. I like that you're highlighting Padlet. I like that you're
Yeah.
like in the idea of showing respect for parents. You're allowing them to be able to express their thoughts about it because you utilized it as a discussion board. Very good. Right. What about in terms of formative assessment? How do you help them do self-assessment?
Uh, for one, sometimes of course we believe that, or in our case, one of the things that we want to happen is that we test, or we teach to the tests, not because of course the test here is not something that is just multiple choice or something like that, but more of authentic assessment. And
Right.
so we have given opportunities to give formative assessment because we feel that it is in this assessments that they'll be able to see their learning, check their learning. And one thing also, maybe later I'll be discussing it, when we do formative assessment, there are also some ways that we utilize it. For example, we give a particular situation, then we ask them to answer, and then we ask other classmates to comment, to suggest, to share what their thoughts about the answers of their classmates. And so there is already that particular discussion between and amongst them.
Right. Okay. Let me go through the next question. In this slide, how do you know that you're as a teacher that this is the best strategy to use in this specific activity? How does this affect the way you journey with your students in terms of processing their cognition, their cognitive process?
Uh, for me personally, I always start with the why. Why would I have this particular activity, and what is this activity for? Because in doing so, I'll be able to think about the best way to not only catch their attention, but also to ensure that they will get something and they will learn something. And then second, if I do give questions, ask questions, I also ask if these questions are leading, because there's sometimes as teachers, there is a tendency for us to, like, well, this is what I want to know. This is what I want them to hear. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we have to ensure that we give them opportunities to think. And in doing so, they are not limited to just what the teacher wants to hear, but really express their specific thoughts. So examples here, in our journal entries, I highlighted here, for example, in journal entry number 3, if they don't have any personal experience, because that happens sometimes when we ask students to reflect on their personal experiences, is because of their age or because of their context. Sometimes we have to meet them where they are. So we also see to it that this is not just limited to a particular setting, but also to their particular context. So we ask them, if they don't have any personal experience, ask them to recall someone or something, some other experiences, precarious or vicarious experiences where they can connect those experiences.
I like that idea that you're highlighting the ability of a teacher to be able to be sensitive to possibilities that sometimes the students won't have that kind of experience. You're providing them also an opportunity to make choices that if I don't have that experience, this is what I'm going to do. And it doesn't make them feel less if they don't have that kind of experience. I like that. Before I move on, I'll segue to my first two live questions, FB live questions from our audience. This question is coming from Jude Red. According to him, he applies assessment as learning in his reading intervention tutorial classes because this is one-on-one idea. However, it is challenging for him to do it in a big class size, which is not the case in a Western classroom. Normally, in a Western classroom, in an American classroom, normally the class size will be very small. The question is, how can we reach all these students in a remote setup, um, especially if you want to help them learn how to assess themselves and learn study skills or research skills or information literacy skills or lesson about learning, especially if your class is a quite big size. How many students do you have in your class, Angelo?
Roughly around 35 in a
35.
class.
That's the maximum.
Yes,
Right,
maximum
that's the
35
maximum.
people. Yeah.
Your class is quite an ideal number. But if you have, example, in the case of Jude, you have 40 students above. What do you think would be a good tip that you can provide to teachers so that they could be able to really provide um, descriptive feedback and choices the way you do to your students?
Mm. Uh, Normally, because of course, if it's a big class, you will expect that there will be different ideas, different ways of knowing, and so normally, what would I do is one, I'll give them the voice and the choice in producing a particular assessment. So, for example, I want them to reflect on a particular situation or a particular setting, a particular story. Sometimes I give them the avenue to either write it down if they're good at writing, or like in the previous slide, I also ask some of my students if they are more comfortable in speaking, in sharing their reflections through a video. Then I'm open to that. So meaning the medium does change, yet the way we assess it, the way we want to look into the learning of the students still remains the same. So that's
Right.
one thing that I think we can do. And second is, of course, I think the rubric or the way we assess, the way we check, and the way we give feedback is it should be really more descriptive in such a way that it will really hit the learning, improve the learning of the students, even if they choose what is comfortable to them as a means to share their learning.
Right. I like that idea that you are capitalizing on, aside from providing them learning paths to choose from, and at the same time, you're also providing a clearer criteria that despite varying learning paths, the criteria can also be generalized that you would not have a difficulty measuring these options that the students would be given to. At also, I like that idea also that you're providing them ideas where they can meet. So, example, in my case, if I were to answer the question of Jude, in my class, I normally give pretest. And in the pretest, I would easily know who are those people who are advancing, or those people who are in the middle ground, who are those people who would be those who would need more focus or who would need more target, continuous learning guides. And then in my classes, I normally create various meeting rooms, discussion rooms, as what was mentioned by Angelo, for me to be able to determine what would be a suitable way which would enable them to learn fast. So that those students who would need more of my attention will be given more attention. I would have to create, I would definitely visit all those learning discussion boards, but I will give more attention to those people who would need extra of my time, because again, they need more of my time. It's good also to be able to utilize a lot of technology to automate some of your work, like similar to what Angela did. Utilize a lot of edtech tools to be able to automate certain activities, so that you could be able to give more of your time to those kids who will be asking of your time. Okay, that's nice. There's another question here, Angelo, coming from Miss LV Gomez. Now, in teaching writing, where checking is quite tedious, what is the best assessment tool that you could recommend? Especially
Uh,
kayo, ang dami yung binabasa,
yes,
di ba?
yes. Just to have the context. one of the things, one of our assessments really, or more of our assessments is really into writing, reflection, writing, and so forth and so on. So one, when we design the rubric, we really try to look into specific criterion that would fit to each particular grade. And second, aside from that, yes, it's I agree. It's really tedious when it's in times of, in the way we try to answer or we give feedback. But I think the students would value it more. So for in our case, aside from the rubric, we also have some notes, some questions, some other feedbacks within the text itself. So I'm hoping that the students really appreciate that, because sometimes we have to mention, I think this idea needs to be improved, or I like your idea, or sometimes if it's really personal, especially if it's a reflection and it's a person in a personal level, I even ask questions. Why do you think so? Are you okay? Something like that. So I try to go beyond the rubrics to ensure that one, they are listened to, because I think one of the things that we also have to consider in this time of the pandemic is that students needs someone to listen to, or someone for them to listen. Yeah. So I think being personal, without of course taking away the objective the descriptive feedback, would help in that. But again, I agree, it's quite tedious. So maybe some tech tools, if you are familiar with, I think if you are an iOS user, Pages has the annotate part, so you can annotate that directly on the text. I think in Google Docs can also have comments and suggestions. So I think it's more of the utilizing what we already have, what we already know, and there are ways to give more feedback to that.
Right. And just to add to that idea, I know it's quite tedious to really check a lot. Notice that in the examples of Angelo, he strikes a balance with the utilization of blended learning. So he doesn't always require his students to write. Yes, he does allow his students to do reflection, but he provides other opportunities for students to do metacognition. When you say metacognition, again, it's how we train students to process the way they think. That's metacognition. So example, in the previous slides, we showcased how he allows the students to do doodling. That he utilizes the ability to doodle in creating mind maps by creating them, by systematizing the way they think. Despite the fact that they don't really write it in essay format, you're allowing them to create maps and algorithms in their head, that you're directing them to think the way they should think on a certain topic that you wanted them to explore on. So I think that's one way that we can I think lessen the task of checking a lot. I agree with Angelo. You need to be able to utilize a lot of edtech tools like Google Docs or even Microsoft for that matter. You can already put comments and share it to the students right away, so that on a live note, you can right away correct the things that you need to correct on the idea, or you can share your thoughts to whatever they express in that specific writing. I like that. Now let me go to my next idea. How do you model self-assessment to your students? And how do you teach self-assessment to your students?
Yes. One thing is, of course, to be open to our students, to be corrected, that we are willing to be corrected by our students. I think that's one way that we have to embrace that. At times we will learn, and not only at times, I think most of the time it's a give and take. So we also learn from our students as well. So sometimes they will correct me when I am in a discussion, or even sometimes in my keynote or my PowerPoint presentation. Some of my students will say, "Sir, I think this should be like this." Okay, so I'll be editing. So I think it's also gives the teacher the impression of authenticity, because we are not saying that we are totally perfect, because we are not perfect. Sometimes we will commit mistakes, and being open to our students correcting us will also give them that particular idea that when we correct them, it is something for their self-improvement. Another way that
Right.
another way that I do it is to share personal experiences. Sometimes in my discussion, I really insert personal stories, personal struggles, especially, for example, when we're talking about faith, we're talking about our faith. Sometimes I have to share my own personal journey, my own faith journey. So that's why in the slide, I share their timeline, because there was a time that I was giving a lecture about faith, and part of it is to share my own faith story. So in that way, the students see that there is a connection, that is something that I'm teaching. It's not something abstract, but something that is can be felt by each and every one of them. And sometimes we also see the connection of their experiences to my experiences and vice versa. And then the last one, I tried this, I opened this one because as I mentioned, one of the things that we really would like our students to utilize is reflection. And so I myself have done my own little reflection and sharing of insights through my blog. So I started it during the pandemic, and it gives me actually not only the feeling of that I have reflected, but also a way for me to model that. Although of course maybe some of them will say it's not that perfect, but it gives them the avenue that I'm also reflecting. I'm not asking them to reflect and then I don't reflect myself. So in that way, I'll be able to share also my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences to my audience or to my students as well.
Right. Through the blog, you're also creating a certain model of how you express your ideas, how you model your reflection, and through that also you it's a way also to showcase it to your students, right? Na if you wanted them to be able to create a blog, this is how you create a blog, something like that, because you blog yourself. Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Right. So allow me to move to the next question. Right. I see this, to be very honest, he has two children, one girl, one boy, and his eldest, the boy, is very good in math. Every time I see the post of his wife, of Angelo's wife, the wife teaching math to his son, the son is really good in math. And in my question, I'd like to ask, what steps do you do or do you take in order for you to be able to teach students how to set goals for themselves?
Yeah. One of the things that just to share before I share the way we do it at home. One of the things that we also do in class is to set some personal learning goals. So before the very beginning of the school year, one of the activities that we ask our students to do is to create their own personal learning goals, and that helps them to look into what they want to stop. For example, so again, metacognition, so there are processes. So what they want to stop doing from the previous school year, what they want to start, and what they want to continue. So it helps them self-regulate. And at the same time, of course, this is quite challenging in the setup that we are in, but we try our best to have schedules for our children. So one of the pictures there, we posted it in our refrigerator, the both schedule of my son and my daughter. We try to at least be faithful to it, but sometimes there are lapses in a way that it will be playtime first before they study and so forth and so on. But at the same time, we try our best to really give them time and opportunity to just sit down, just do some drills for Apollo. It's more of math because he likes that actually. So here, it's just a screen shot of his video. He's doing perfect squares. So I think that's one of the things that my wife have taught him, and so that's one what he was showcasing there. At the same time, also our daughter, we asked them to write, especially that we are preparing her for this coming school year, even if it's in a remote learning. We want her to start also her education.
Right. So in this case, why the goal is to create self-regulation. I like that you're focusing also through assessment as learning. You would want to identify important learning goals that you want your students to do and to
Yes.
achieve as they go through the learning process. And at the same time, you want them to establish routine. That even in your own little way, it's a simple checklist, right? But when these things kept on being repeated, it becomes a habit. It becomes habit forming, right? So that's one way for you to be able to really allow your students and provide them ways to be able to set their goals. In this case, would you like to share some ways on how we can handle students, how you can handle student feedback, right? Do you believe that peer feedback can also be helpful in providing self-assessments?
Uh, yes. My answer is of course yes, but it's challenging. I have to admit that it's really challenging, especially it depends sometimes on the level, the grade level. Sometimes if they're too young, of course, there's a tendency for them to instead when you ask them to evaluate their peers. Sometimes if they are friends, so usually they will say, "Oh, I'll give them the highest grade."
Tama.
This my friend go highest
Oo,
high.
dito
Yeah.
sa, correct. Dito sa Pilipinas, magbarkadahan system, mataas ang grade sa barkada eh. Correct.
Yes. That's why these are some of our ways to ensure that we give uh, descriptive feedback. So first, we try to show exemplars. So when we ask them to do a task, one of the things that is asked of us is to show an exemplar so that they'll be guided. That's one way. Second, for formative or even summative assessment, sometimes we do feedback together. So, for example, we are discussing a particular item in the test. So I'll be sharing the question, ask a student to answer it, and then I ask also other students to give a feedback to the answer if there's something missing, especially if vis-a-vis with our side by side with the rubrics. So they will say sometimes it lacks this part, or it's good, it's already complete. So the feedbacking together helps in the monitoring of the feedback of students, that it will not be so subjective that because they're friends, you give them the highest grade, but because it is part of the rubric. And then the last one is self-assessment, where we try our best to really ask them personally to evaluate themselves. So here in the last part of the slide, or the right moves part of the slide, is some of the checklist that we did. We try to do some checklists. So they themselves, or the personally, the student will be able to check if they're able to answer the questions, if they are able to give personal thoughts, if they have concrete feelings, or they were able to integrate, so forth and so on. So in that way, they are aware of what they have done and assess if they're learning something is what I mean is fit to the rubrics, and that in itself is a way for us to give feedback to our
Right.
students.
So doon sa mga nagtatanong ng mga sample rubric, this is a classic example of how we do self-evaluation, particularly for Ma'am Gloria Madelo de Dumo. So ito yung isang example ng isang rubric na pwede nating gamitin for self-assessment. Kasi normally tayong ang idea natin ng rubric ay yung pang-general. Pero si Sir Angelo, ang ginagawa niyang rubric ay he tried his very best to chunk the different aspects of the rubric, and then he turned it into a checklist so that when he talks to the students, when he explains he explains the grading, kasi syempre may mga bata nagtatanong. So this is also one important thing, 'di ba? Sa right med nga pwede magtanong. So dapat sa atin pwedeng magtanong, 'di ba? So when the student receives this checklist and when he goes back for consultation, bakit ito parang hindi ganito yung grade ko. So now with the checklist, he's able to in detail explain what exactly did the students achieve and what are the things that they need to improve on. So notice that it's very detailed, And at the same time, you're able also to articulate right away to the students the things that they need to improve on to be able to ensure that in the next run, if they're going to be able to do the same skill for that activity, kaya na nila, hindi na nila babalikan itong errors na sinabi ni Sir Angelo. Right. So that's for a sample rubric. Sir, ito pa meron po tayong question again from FB Live. Sir, what can you advise dun sa mga teachers natin na kunyari limited yung internet? Tapos ang source lang nila ay FB Live or Messenger. So paano tayo makakapagbigay ng paraan kung paano sila makakapag self-assess?
Siguro po, because again, one of the challenges in this time of pandemic is we have to look into the context of our students. Some of them might be fortunate that they have internet. Some of them might not have any form of internet connection.
Right.
So I think one of the ways is, of course, to reach them out or for us, of course, we try to limit it because baka mamaya naman because of the time, there's no time limit kasi yun nga nung medyo challenging ngayon na work from home. So sometimes even the delineation of work and home, nahirapan tayo yan. No? But making ourselves available for consultation, as what Miss Emmy have mentioned, is a good help already for them. So to ensure that we are available when they need help, that's one way. And then of course, pagdating naman do sa mga ibang modalities, for example, naka-module lang sila, I think having self-evaluation and then later on, may kasama kasi itong self-evaluation. I think in the last slide, it will be shown. Aside from the self-evaluation, there's also the teacher's evaluation. So, doon pa lang magkakaroon ng
correlation.
Comparison, yes. Right. So, kung tama ba sabi ni Bata nung pag-self-assess niya, and then the teacher, and then the discussion can already start.
Right. I like that. Na ako kasi tama yung payo ni Sir Angelo na kahit na limited yung access natin with internet connection, posible pa rin naman pong magkaroon ng assessment as learning na hindi kinakailangan ang feedback ng gagaling sa huli ng inyong module or kailangan tapusin nyo pa yung buong lesson nyo. Doon pa lang kayo magbibigay ng feedback sa mga bata. I encourage everybody that kunyari, even in the formative setup, nandun pa lang kayo sa formative level, dapat nagbibigay na kayo ng feedback, descriptive feedback about how the students learn about certain topics. Kasi, posibleng nauulit yung mga skills na ito. At kapag nabanggit niyo na ito sa kanya at paulit-ulit niyang inuulit yung error, ibig sabihin, there might be something wrong with the way either you as a teacher, parang may hindi yata siya nagigets sa akin. Or, maaring maging sign din ito sa student, baka may learning difficulty itong batang ito, so that we could already address it right away. So dapat, kunyari, kagaya ng sinasabi ni Sir Angelo, nagbibigay siya ng exemplars at importante yung consultation process. So dapat bukas tayo dun sa magtatanong yung mga bata for them to be able to correct their feedback and to provide feedback, and at the same time for you to be able to really explain where you are coming from based on what you saw from their output and based on the rubric that you saw. Dapat po pag nagpapaliwanag po tayo, hindi lang po dapat personal. Kasi ang tingin ko mas creative ito. Tayong mga Pilipino, pag makulay, mahilig tayo na, ito mas maganda kasi makulay. Ito walang kulay. Mga ganon. So dapat kung tayo magbibigay ng descriptive feedback, tama yung sabi ni Sir Angelo, stick on what you saw, what you mentioned in your rubric para objective yung ating pagbibigay ng feedback natin sa mga bata. And at the same time, yung mga bata natin makikinig yan eh. I would like to believe that our children are like sponges. When you tell them these things, nakikinig yung mga yan. Kaya dapat ipaliwanag natin sa kanila ng mabuti so that come the time that you make them do the same or perform the same skill, hindi nila uulitin yung mga ganong errors. Right. Okay. Thank you, Sir Angelo, for that. I'd like to proceed to the next slide. Siyempre, di ba mga bata tayo na grade conscious, takot magkamali. Right. How do you make students face failures? Or how do you yeah, how do you make them face ambiguity and failure and setbacks when they have one in your classes?
I would like to reiterate, Miss Emmy, nung binanggit mo po. Kailangan talaga ng consultation, yung conversation and dialogue with the students. Kasi many of them would want the personal touch in a way. Kasi it motivates them to be better. And then they know that hindi lang ito dahil sinabi mo, pero there is that particular concern. So, conversation and dialogue. I always remember, even after, for example, may mga grades or may mga, minsan kasi pag releasing of mga grades sa amin, pag gano'n. So, siyempre may mga ibang feeling nila down, pag gano'n. And then, sometimes, after class or even before the class ends, pag medyo nasa activity, medyo patapos na kami, I even go to some of them and ask them, kamusta ka? How are you? Okay ka lang ba? And then some of them even go to, sir, bakit ganito? So I think it's, again, the consultation, the conversation is important in order for them to not only know what to improve on, but at the same time to feel that despite this particular failures or maybe may mga uncertainties, may mga hindi sila maintindihan, you're there to support them. That's why I also put there, aside from the rubrics, it's also good to go beyond the rubrics. When we say go beyond the rubrics, it's not saying na, huwag na natin gamitin ng rubrics. So, kasi mabait ka naman, so say go. No. But this, this goes to say na, kailangan may personal touch. Kaya nga, in one of the challenges, as I mentioned a while, this is a question, mahirap talaga pag mga essays. Kasi minsan, in our case, we also try to not only look for the things that they have to improve, but also to affirm their correct things, that thinking, correct perspectives. So, dapat ma-highlight din yun na hindi sabihin, bakit ganito, bakit ganito. Minsan, pag tama talaga kailangan, I like your idea, I like this. So, for example, here, in one of the reflection I wrote here, yung bata, ayaw niyang sabihin. Kasi may person na. Kasi we give them the choice to say, kung hindi man nila masabi yung story, kasi nga, nung kwento, they would say like that, I don't want to say why, kasi medyo personal. So, I will write there, so I understand. Kasi, naintindihan ko, baka nga sobrang personal, so hindi pwedeng sabihin. But, at the same time, when he was trying to share it to the reflection, nakikita mo naman kung ano gusto niyang sabihin. And even at times, I also go to that students, are you sure, are you okay? Minsan, I go to that. And then, challenging them, for example, if example here in one of the example, I did not have strong faith. So what's the plan? What do you plan to do with it? So again, affirming their correct ideas or their ideas in that particular, even if they're not correct at times, but the attempt minsan kailangan i-affirm mo rin na their honesty, especially in our reflection, sharing, isa sa pinakamahirap is to share your personal reflection and affirming that they have shared a personal reflection. It's something that nakita ko sa mga students ko, kapag in-affirm mo yung kanilang personal experience, natutuwa sila. So they become more open to you. So in that way, the conversation continues on, and hopefully we'll be able to challenge them to divert that particular failure, ambiguity, uncertainty.
Which segues me to a very crucial question. Kasi syempre, pag sinabi nating failure, minsan it could translate to another thing. Pero it could also be something beneficial. How would you know, or would you believe that regular practice and frequent self-assessment would build grit and empathy? Yes. How do you build confidence and character?
Ayan. Yun nga po, it's really challenging pagdating kasi sa mga bata, especially if they're so grade conscious. So you have to have that mind shift and that paradigm shift na one, grades don't define you. So some of the things, we really reiterate that even in the very beginning of our classes, that your grades doesn't define you. So I think this time it's also a good opportunity for us to evaluate our grades, especially in different modalities, and we are in a different setup. Maybe grades might not be of help. So what can we do? I think it's a way for us to parang push that learning for learning's sake, because it is something that they really need to learn. So even in the way we define the content, maybe it's more of the relevance, more of the what is relatable to them. So give them choices and voices so that they will not be stuck. Kasi I believe that wala naman talagang one size fits all na education. So sometimes you have to give them the choices and the voice. And then if you give them that, they will try to own their learning. So in that way, we can build grit and empathy. And also, siguro, in addition to that, Miss M, is to design some of our assessments to be more authentic. Na make it real life. So mga PBL, performance tasks na talagang relatable sa kanilang context.
Right. And that would be able to, that would provide avenues for students to really own what they learn, kasi they ng iba, each of them would definitely have a varied experience, right? And then by making them undergo those experiences, magkakaroon kayo ng kunyari nakita nila, uy, nahihirapan din ako, 'di ba? Because you see now na meron ding mga estudyanteng nahihirapan, they learn how to empathize with each other. Oo nga, di ba? O nga, parehas lang tayo nahihirapan. Bakit ka din nahihirapan, di ba? Mag-aral nga tayo, magsabay nga tayong mag-aral. Right? So, may mga ganong instances, right? Which, meron akong tanong, sir, galing sa FB Live, galing kay Brian Sarinas. Sabi nga, sir, paano kung 3 beses na, 2 beses, 3 beses na bumagsak sa assessment, tapos lahat ginawa mo na. Ano pa pwede nating gawin, sir?
Para sa akin, kailangan pa rin natin silang tulungan. Parang ang hirap naman kung
susuko, sir.
Oo. Kapag sumuko, parang it gives them that feeling na talagang failure sila.
Tama.
So don't stop. Kahit sabihin natin bumagsak, parang siguro going to my previous point, tignan rin natin baka may mga magandang bagay naman talaga siyang nagagawa. So affirm that and challenge. And then, of course, kung talagang medyo mahirap, I would like to go back to what Miss Emmy have mentioned. No? Minsan, learning blocks. Diba? Parang, eto nung learner natin, mabibilis sila, mababagal. It's also a way for us maybe to design our lessons to fit the context of our students. So, kung nahihirapan na siya, baka pwede rin natin tignan ng mga binibigay. Baka naman sobrang challenging. So, baka pwede natin, we're not saying na we water it down, but we try to fit it to their context. Ano nung mas magiging beneficial sa kanila.
Right. Akong nakikita ko sa sagot ni Sir Angelo, alam nyo kung sino, yung pelikula ni Sandra Bullock na tungkol dun sa football player na inadapt nila. Ano ang title ng pelikulang yon? Yung, basta tungkol ito sa isang football player, ng NFL, inadapt ng isang white woman, right, na talagang hirap na hirap siya mag-aral. Pagkatapos, napansin nila na aside from the kid encountering racism, pero napansin nila na hindi siya nagbabasa, hindi pala talaga siya marunong magbasa. Hindi talaga siya kumbaga parang hindi talaga yun yung skill niya. Pero magaling siya mag-sports, magaling siya sa football, magaling siya sa basketball. The Blind Side. Yun ang title niya, The Blind Side. Naisip ko din, di ba? Yun ang title niya. Panoorin niyo po yun. Pero yung mga teacher niya, yung unang-unang teacher niya, yung biology teacher. Di ba? But he can write. And then eventually, everybody, hindi siya sinukuan ng teacher niya. In fact, may isang teacher doon, tinuruan siya, chinutor siya. Hindi sila sinukuan. Nakapasa yung bata. Right? And he even became cum laude when he graduated in the University of Mississippi. Imagine, right? How far you can lead a kid kung hindi nyo sa sinukuan. Diba? Parang pag-ibig lang yan, wag nating susukuan. Diba? Oo, pag mahal mo, wag mong susukuan. Tama. Right.
I also remember a particular movie, aside sa The Blind, sa maganda yun, I watched that, also is The Freedom Writers.
Right.
Kasi minsan, the perspective na wala nang pag-asa, minsan ganun eh. And kapag nag-agree tayo doon as teachers, parang, so sila rin mismo wala nang pag-asa. So, Diba? Parang doon sa moving yon pinakita na naniwala siya kahit worse yung klase, naniwala siya that there's something there, there's beauty in there. So maybe that's one way to look at it also.
Right, right. Ang pag-asa ng gagaling, remember, one spark of hope can create a lot of life, can create a lot of difference. Right. Let's say going to the ayan, another example ng assessment, right? How do you provide descriptive feedback? Ito yung mga tanong ng taong bayan. Paano ba talaga mag-provide ng descriptive feedback, sir?
Ayan. Sa amin po, what we did is, of course, we still have a rubric. Just kasi, of course, we have to be objective. We have to really be descriptive with our feedback. But this is one of the things that we tried. We also do some checklists. That, again, ito nung other side. I was discussing a while ago. Ito nung other side nung aside from the self-evaluation ni student and the things, kasi aside from the checklist, there's also things to improve on. So we ask them to think about what they need to improve on. There's also the teacher evaluation where we also try to check talaga, to counter check. Did they were able really pa talaga to give personal thoughts. And then aside from that is the more specific feedback. So aside from this one, so we have a rubric, we have the checklist that we did out of the rubric, and then we also give more specific feedback dun mismo sa paper. So medyo tedious siya, pero at the same time, many of the students would appreciate that. Kasi ibig sabihin, hindi lang sila nakabox doon sa, ito kasi nung rubrics, this is what the rubrics have said. Yes, it's descriptive, but at the same time, it also gives them an avenue to be heard, and the discussion between the teacher and the students can start from that, so the conversation.
Right. Ito yung sinasabi namin kanina na kino-correlate yung idea ng bata, yung idea ng student para malaman natin kung saan sila nanggagaling. At malaman din ng mga bata kung saan tayo nanggagaling bilang teacher. Para pag nag-consultation kayo, this will be a reference of conversation. Para hindi kayo, ito yung sinasabi natin na, di ba, parang natatakot tayong maging subjective. But with this alone, with your checklist, wala kayong magiging objective yung usapan nyo kasi iikot lang kayo dito. Yes. Right. Good suggestion. This is my last question for today, sir. Of course, mahalaga sa assessment as learning, yung establishing an environment where students feel free to be able to express themselves and have that idea of being confident and competent na hindi sila natatakot when they speak up for themselves. How do you create that, sir, in your classroom?
I guess po talagang mahalaga yung teacher-parent collaboration. So here I've shared parents' orientation is because aside from being a teacher, I'm also a parent, and my panganay will go to Savior in this particular time. So one of the things that was a joke, alam ko sa FB yata lumalabas na siya, a joke or a meme na kung saan habang si student ay nasa kanilang computer, nasa tabi nila yung mga parents nila. Na minsan parang parang ganon. One of the challenges that was presented to us in the parents orientation is to give trust to our students.